And here in this session, we are going to learn about our Coastal Wildlife Conservation Initiative. And let's get started and watch them at the beach.
Hi everyone, I'm Victoria Vettel and I'm a wildlife and landscape biologist at SRPC South Florida. Today we're exploring Juno Beach in Palm Beach County in South Florida, and I'm excited to share and discuss the rack line with you. While you may not be familiar with the term rack line, you've probably spent time searching through the rack line at a beach, looking for shells, sea glass, and other treasures. So, what is the rack line? Why is it important? What might we find in one? What should I do if I see a baby sea turtle in the rack line? I'll be answering these questions and more in the next couple of minutes, so keep watching and keep your eyes peeled for treasures in the sand. The rack line is the part of the beach where organic material and other debris is deposited during high tide. Every beach has a unique rack line that's dependent on the natural ecology of the area, water currents, and weather patterns. However, most rack lines are typically made up of seagrasses, algae, seashells, and parts of plants like seeds and twigs. Here are some examples of things we commonly find in the rack line in southeast Florida. We often see seaweed and algae called sargassum, which forms a special habitat when it's floating in the Atlantic Ocean that supports baby sea turtles, migratory birds, and many other species. We may find other plant material too, like turtle grass, woody twigs and branches, and red and black mangrove seeds. Of course, we also see lots of seashells and other parts of marine animals too. For example, we might find parts of a sand dollar skeleton, clam shells, scallop shells, sea turtle eggshells, and many different types of conch shells. While you might want to take some pretty shells home, you can also take a video or pictures of your favorites and use those to research your finds later. You may be surprised to learn what creatures called those shells home. Keep an eye out for other interesting finds like sponges, pieces of coral, jellyfish, or a coconut covered in barnacles. You truly never know what you might find hidden in the rack. So why is the rack line important? While it may appear that there's nothing living in the rack line, it's actually full of living organisms like fungi, beetles, and isopods. These tiny creatures attract larger animals like shorebirds and crabs, which use the rack line as a buffet table full of tasty morsels. While you may not see ghost crabs hunting throughout the rack during the day, you can identify their burrows by finding a hole surrounded by tracks that look like 6 vertical comma marks. In addition, the rack line carries seeds that will eventually grow into new plants like mangroves, coconuts, and grasses. These plants may grow and help create beach dunes, which protect our shorelines from erosion and provide shelter for many more coastal species. One of the most exciting things to witness on Florida's beaches is the sight of baby sea turtles making their way to the ocean after emerging from their nests. If you're lucky enough to see baby sea turtles traveling down the beach to the shoreline, you might worry about the many obstacles in their way. Hatchlings may be preyed on by birds, crabs, and other species during this journey to the water. However, it is important to remember that sea turtles are federally protected species and should therefore never be touched and only observed from a distance. It might be tempting to help those hatchlings through the debris in the rack line, as the seaweed and twigs can look like big mountains to those tiny creatures. But hatchlings are prepared to climb the rack line, and you might be impressed by how quickly they can conquer it. In addition, scientists believe this first journey to the ocean is important for hatchlings to solidify their internal awareness of the beach they were born from. When they reach adulthood, they will return to this exact beach to breed. As we near the end of summer and are midway into hurricane season, some sea turtle hatchlings may become blowbacks, meaning that they are pushed back onto shore due to strong winds and surf. In most instances, these hatchlings will rest in the rack line before returning to the ocean, but if you do see a hatchling that appears disoriented or injured, you can call FWC and follow biologist guidance to get them help. Here in South Florida, disoriented or exhausted blowbacks are transported to the Loggerhead Marine Life Center, where they will receive veterinary care and rest before being released safely. I hope this video inspires you to go out and explore the rack line. I also hope that you find some fascinating creatures and plants, and perhaps even a sea turtle hatchling or two. If you do explore a rack line near you, you may unfortunately notice that mixed in with all the natural debris, there's also a lot of human-made debris, mostly plastic. We have seen lots of plastic waste washing up on our beaches in southeast Florida during storms. So if you go looking for treasures like seashells or sea glass, you might consider bringing a mesh bag to fill with trash that you can then remove from the beach. The many animals that rely on the rack line for shelter and food will appreciate you giving them a helping hand. Stay tuned to learn about more coastal habitats from my colleagues in other parts of Florida, and be sure to ask us any questions you may have at the end.
Good afternoon and welcome to this virtual edition of MarineQuest. I'm Tom. I'm an ecologist with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission and the Coastal Wildlife Conservation Initiative. And we're in Franklin County on St. George Island at Dr. Julian G. Bruce St. George Island State Park. And we're going to talk a little bit today about the coastal system, particularly dunes, the ecological function that it plays, and we'll also touch on very briefly, it's not just the ecology that makes Florida's beaches and dunes important. They also play a major role in our state's economy. The beach is a nutrient-poor system. However, grasses, seaweed, and other organic matter that comes in with the tide is deposited onto what we call the rack line, where it decomposes and releases the nutrients that not only nourish the plants needed for dune formation, but is also an important part of the food web. Beach dune communities in Florida are found only along high-energy coastlines, and hence are a dynamic and constantly changing habitat. The major forces shaping the beach dune system are wind and wave action. Onshore winds blow sand inland until it is stopped by a barrier, usually a plant, and the sand drops out around the base of the plant. Dune plants are adapted to constantly grow upward to avoid burial from the deposited sands. Dune plants also have a thick cuticle or covering to avoid abrasion from the wind-blown sands. Here we see the beginnings of a new dune. Years of sand accumulation at the base of this plant will eventually lead to the large dunes seen along Florida's coastline. As the dune grows, a different set of plants will seed in and stabilize the new dune. In addition to the plants that take root in the dunes, many animals also call the dunes their home. 5 types of federally threatened and endangered beach mice are found only in Florida's dunes. While most sea turtles nest on the beach, the green sea turtle prefers to nest in vegetation at the base or toe of the dune. One animal that you are more than likely to see when visiting the beach dune is the ghost crab, which lives in burrows and is often seen foraging for food in the sand. The toe of the dune is also important habitat for sea and shorebirds such as this sanderling for foraging, roosting, and nesting habitat. As mentioned earlier, Florida's beach habitats play a large part in our economy, with tourism contributing roughly $40 billion per year. But remember, when visiting the beach, it's not only a place for recreation, but also the home to many plants and animals. Here we see the consequences of what can happen when dune vegetation is damaged or missing. Without the dune vegetation, the dune is susceptible to what is known as a blowout, where the whole structure of the dune is eroded away. Without dunes, damage from storms and hurricanes is greatly increased. Sea oats, although not a particularly rare plant, are protected by the state of Florida. And the reason for this is the state sees the importance of sea oats in the establishment and preservation of dune habitats. So it's illegal in the state of Florida to pick or trample on sea oats. When I was a little kid and you'd go to the beach, that's what parents would always say, stay out of the sea oats, stay out of the sea oats. For the longest time I thought, oh wow, that must be a really, really endangered plant, but it's not. It's the ecological function that makes this plant important in the state of Florida. The take-home message from today's video is always access the beach from a prescribed parking area, and always use a dune crossover. This prevents damage to the fragile dune and the many plants and animals that live there. So remember to leave only footprints and take only memories, and deposit your trash and recyclables in the proper bins.
Hi, we are here at Little Estero Island Critical Wildlife Area, and this Critical Wildlife Area, or CWA, is located on a barrier island in Lee County on the Gulf of Mexico. And it's a pretty typical sandy beach habitat, but there is one really neat feature of the CWA that we want to focus on today, and it's this back beach lagoon behind me. So lagoons form on beaches when beaches are going through a process called accretion. And accretion is the opposite of erosion. Erosion is when things are wearing away and shrinking, but accretion is when they're building up. So when beaches are accreting, wind and waves are bringing sand on shore, and sometimes the sand accumulates higher in the front than in the lower parts of the back of the beach. And that's what's happened here. You have some low points where seawater has gotten trapped behind the higher beach ridge, and it's mixed with a little bit of rainwater, and it's a persistent feature of this beach. It doesn't kind of come and go with the weather. It tends to be here all of the time. It's large enough and deep enough that it's a permanent feature here now. And until erosion takes over again and we lose this front ridge, we'll continue to have this lagoon feature back here. And this is a really cool and important feature on beaches, especially for wading birds and shorebirds. Those two types of birds really enjoy lagoons for foraging and also for roosting, because you tend to have less pedestrians. Like if you look on the beach here, you see there's people walking along the shoreline, and that's a type of disturbance that can interrupt feeding and resting that these birds need to accomplish, especially if they're migrating. So if they're on long migrations, then they really need to spend their energy either resting when they stop over or building up their energy reserves foraging. So you'll see a lot of little shorebirds along here. Some of them are resting, most of them right now. But also the foraging is good because you don't have the same kind of wave energy and activity here. It's a little bit calmer. So there's fewer people disturbing them. It's a little bit easier to find and locate prey. And you'll see wading birds, like we have a state listed or imperial tricolor heron over there. And it's a little bit easier for wading birds to forage because they feed on fish. And in a closed system like this lagoon, there's less places for those fish to escape, to go off into deeper waters where the wading birds can't reach them. So lagoon features on beaches are really important parts of the ecosystem. You'll notice that the water is calmer here, like I said. It'll also be different in salinity and temperature than the Gulf waters over there. They're usually a little bit more buggy, and so that's something that the shorebirds will feed on. And then, like back here, you'll see that they have some fringing mangroves. Sometimes those mangroves will be good roosting spots for things like swallows that can come out and feed on the flying insects that gather around the lagoon, especially in the morning or the evening. But all in all, you can see why it's more quiet, there's fewer people, and so it provides a really good opportunity for these birds to replenish their resources and to rest and to forage. And we really appreciate these lagoon systems at our beaches, especially in the CWA. So some of the birds that we're seeing foraging around the lagoon are the taller guy in the front, that's a black-bellied plover. And then in the back, we have a trio of ruddy turnstones, and these are primarily migratory birds. They don't nest here. They nest in another part of the world, and they come here when outside of the breeding season. And then resting a little bit further away, we have some semi-palmated plovers. And again, these are mostly migratory birds. They don't nest here, but we do have birds, shorebirds, that nest right on this beach in these areas. Wilson's plovers, snowy plovers, and killdeer have all nested right here on this beach just this past nesting season. And they'll lay their eggs right on the ground. So right in the shell house, for example, they'll just make a little depression and lay their well-camouflaged eggs right there. And that's why it's really important when you see signs in these areas that say caution nesting birds or do not enter nesting birds, to make sure you respect those signs and keep your distance. And even outside the breeding season, it's best to just watch these birds from a distance and try and not flush them or make them fly or interfere with their normal behaviors. And it's really nice to just stand at a safe distance. We're not too far away, and then you can watch them and kind of see if you can learn each of the birds that are present here, and just appreciate the diversity of wildlife that you can find around these lagoons. Hi everyone.
Hey everybody, thanks for watching that video. It's very interesting to learn about how beaches are so important for a variety of different wildlife species and what they eat and how those habitats are so important to preserve. Our biologists are back from the beach right now. Hi everybody, we have Tom, Natalie, Victoria, and another Michelle.
Yes, I just wanted to mention, so in the video you may have noticed a dog running in the very background at the very beginning. And I just wanted to mention that some counties and towns have rules about whether dogs are allowed on their beaches. And if dogs are not allowed, please keep your dog at home when you're visiting the beach. Some beaches do allow dogs. At these beaches, it is very important to remember 4 things. Number 1. Keep dogs on a leash. Number 2, pick up and throw away dog waste. Number 3, keep dogs away from animals like birds and sea turtles. And number 4, stay out of dunes or roped and flagged areas. The general rule of thumb, to best protect wildlife, please leave your dogs at home when visiting the beach. For more information, check out our website, CWCI. And now for any questions.
Here's an interesting question. What season, is there a season for nesting shorebirds? Are there specific times of year that people should especially watch out for their eggs on the beach?
I'll go ahead and answer that one, I think, Michelle. Shorebirds typically nest in Florida. The earliest nesters are usually in February, but most nesting gets underway in March. Bear in mind, a lot of the birds that nest here in Florida are traveling from other parts of the world just to Florida to lay their eggs on the beaches. And probably the busiest months for nesting in Florida are May through July. And usually by August, maybe a little bit into September, is when those chicks are starting to learn to fly, and they'll be joining their parents back to their wintering grounds.
Anyone else have any questions? Are there any other important? Yes, Natalie.
So Tom, how do dunes protect humans and beaches?
It's been shown that in areas where you have a dune field, they tend to break up the energy of the storm, both the wind and the storm surge, and protect both the habitats and the human structures built behind the sand dunes. So sand dunes are a good thing to have in Florida. They provide wildlife habitat, and they also protect the human-built environment.
Victoria, what can I take home from the rack line?
So in general, it's always a great idea to practice leave no trace, which means leaving anything you find at the beach unless it's trash. We would love for you to take trash away from the beach. But if you did want to collect seashells or maybe a little piece of coral that has died, the only thing that we really want to make sure you know is to double check that those seashells are no longer living and don't have a living animal inside of them. That's really important to check, especially for some of the little snails or crabs that can hide pretty deep in their shell. If you're unsure about whether there's a living animal inside of it, probably a great time to just leave it on the beach. And another thing is just with the sea turtle hatchlings, if you do see those at the rack line, please do remember that you're not allowed to touch them. They're federally endangered species, and you can just observe them from a distance.
Michelle, why do we have critical wildlife areas? What makes them different from parks?
Well, critical wildlife areas are discrete areas where wildlife tend to congregate, and that means there's a collection of them in higher numbers. And they're usually there for some really important activity like nesting season, or it's an important stopover for feeding during migration. And those areas are in a place where the animals can be subject to disturbances, usually unwittingly. For example, maybe people landing with kayaks or things of that nature. And so a CWA allows the agency to close those areas to public access during those important periods so that that wildlife has the space it needs to successfully hatch eggs, or we have some CWAs that are for bats, so for the maternity season to raise their pups. So it just gives some peace and quiet to the wildlife so they can be successful in feeding or raising their young.
Thanks so much, Michelle. We have a question here. What season is best for bird watching migratory shorebird species?
So the best time of year for watching migratory birds right now is a pretty good time of year to be outside, and especially on our beaches, to see a lot of the shorebirds are starting to migrate through. So you'll see some pretty unique species. For example, piping plovers, which are a federally endangered shorebird, start showing up here for the winter. They're the true Florida snowbird, if you will. So they start showing up here to forage on our beaches in winter. When I was out shooting this video last week, we had a lot of white pelicans. And so if you look up in the sky right now, you might see some of our really cool, larger, more charismatic birds circling in the skies like flocks of white pelicans and other species. So right now is a great time of year, and then they reverse direction in the spring. So the spring is also a pretty cool time to go out and start seeing birds either in the sky or on the beach. So get out there.
Thanks so much. What types of careers are involved with coastal conservation? And maybe you all can take turns, talking about your specific position, and maybe touch briefly on how you got there, like what you studied in school.
So I studied biology and anthropology in school, and I've always liked being outside. And so I would suggest, if you want to go into biology or any of the other sciences, that you take a lot of math classes. That can help you greatly. And as far as fields that you could work on the beach, biology, either as a species biologist or as an ecologist, which is my background. You can also be a geologist and do a lot of work on Florida's beaches.
So when I was in college, I studied environmental studies, and then I got my master's in biological oceanography. I don't spend as much time on the beach for my job as I did in college, but right now I track in our conservation actions, and we try to understand if they are effective. So we go out there and we monitor and we do restoration activities, but are those really working, and how can we make them better?
Very interesting. Michelle?
Like Natalie, I also have my master's degree in biological oceanography. Since I was a little kid, I've always been interested in animals and animal health. But the traditional veterinarian who takes care of domestic animals was not as appealing to me. So I love wildlife, and I love being outdoors. And so that's what attracted me to working with coastal wildlife. And originally, when I started working with coastal wildlife, it was investigating impacts of red tides on seabirds and shorebirds and wading birds. So problem solving is fun work.
Yes, it's very necessary. And Victoria?
Hi. So I got an undergraduate degree in biology, and then I did my master's in marine biology. And now my position is leading FWC's Marine and Estuarine Goal Team, and that team helps decide how federal money is used to conserve coastal and estuarine habitats in Florida. And I would say, in addition to what Tom said about taking math classes, taking, focusing on writing is something that I think a lot of people don't realize is going to be very useful as you become a scientist, even if you work on the management side of things or on the research side of things. So that's something to consider too.
It's always helpful for students and young adults to learn about how you got where you are now. I'm in the communications office, so I'm not a scientist, but I studied journalism and anthropology. So yes, we have one more question here. Tom, what is your favorite animal on the beach? And if you all want to go around and state your favorite animal, and then we will wrap it up.
So my favorite animals overall are snakes. So every so often when you're out on the beach dune, you will find some snakes, black racers, coach whips. If you're on the back part of the beach, you may find a salt marsh snake. So any day I can catch a snake in the woods is a great day.
How about you, Victoria?
Sure. It's probably obvious from my video, but I love seeing sea turtle hatchlings. I love seeing adult sea turtles too, but I just think it's pretty incredible to see all the obstacles that sea turtle hatchlings make it through in order to make it to the ocean for the first time. I think it's a really cool process.
And Natalie?
I'm also biased towards sea turtles. That's where I studied my master's. I studied sea turtles, but of the different species, I really love green sea turtles.
And how about you, Michelle?
Well, I definitely never get tired of seeing snowy plover chicks, especially recently hatched ones on the beach, because they always are impossibly tiny and impossibly cute. They look like little cotton balls, and they're out there running around and eating, getting food for themselves, and it just is always mesmerizing to get to watch that.
It was so neat to see all of these different species in the videos, and we certainly appreciate your time with talking to us today. We learned a lot about our beach habitats, so thank you all so much, and thanks everyone who tuned in. And if you want to stay tuned for our next presentations, we have one more left starting at 1:30 going till 2 p.m. So stick around for those, and thank you all so much for your time today, and take care.